Imagine walking into like a modern, high-tech aerospace engineering firm.
Yeah.
Everywhere you look, there's this expectation of just absolute precision, right?
Right, yeah, like clean rooms and clipboard.
Exactly. You see pristine digital CAD drawings on glowing monitors,
Hmm.
engineers debating exact structural tolerances down to the millimeter, blueprints mapping out the propulsion systems of next-generation rockets.
It's a completely rational environment,
Yeah.
clean, logical, and entirely focused on the future.
Yes, exactly, that kind of clinical atmosphere. But then you walk over to the desk of the lead propulsion engineer, and sitting right there in the middle of all these digital schematics is a chunk of dirt.
A chunk of dirt.
Yeah, well, a 4,000-year-old cracked clay tablet from ancient Mesopotamia.
Oh, wow.
Right. And it's covered in tiny wedge-shaped scratches. And this highly trained engineer looked you dead in the eye, points to a symbol that academics translate as a god of water and earth, and says, there it is. That's the original blueprint for our spaceship.
It sounds like the setup for a science fiction thriller or something.
It really does.
Just this absolute collision of ancient mythology and modern technological anxiety.
It does, but the crazy thing is, it's not fiction. This kind of staggering reinterpretation is actually happening.
Yeah, it really is.
So welcome to our custom-tailored deep dive, where we're going to trace one of the most incredible, bizarre, and frankly fascinating narrative journeys in human history.
And we are looking directly at you, our listener, because this deep dive is built entirely around the sources you've provided us.
Exactly. Our mission today is to track the evolution of the Anunnaki. We're going to start at their true historical origins as the high gods of ancient Mesopotamia, written on those very clay tablets.
Right.
And we'll follow them all the way to their modern reincarnation as like a race of genetically engineering, gold mining ancient aliens.
It's a remarkable trajectory, really.
Yeah.
And for this conversation, I'll be bringing the perspective of an Assyriologist and a historian of the ancient Near East.
Which is super helpful here.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll be grounding us in what the people of Sumer and Babylon actually believed and what the cuneiform texts literally say.
And I'll be coming at this from the angle of modern cultic movements and the sociology of conspiracy theories.
A good mix.
I think so, too. I'm just endlessly fascinated by how ancient texts mutate, how they get hijacked, and, how they evolve to serve the psychological needs of modern people.
Because they always do, don't they?
They really do. Because to hook you right away, listener, consider this contrast. How did a group of ancient deities figures originally written into existence on muddy clay to explain the grueling realities of agricultural labor, the changing of the seasons, and the creation of humanity, how did they end up being cited on international television in 2016?
Oh, the Iraqi transport minister.
Yes,
Yeah.
by a modern Iraqi transport minister who claimed that these gods built 7,000-year-old spaceports.
It's a massive cognitive leap. I mean, to go from an ancient agrarian society trying to understand the cosmos to a modern politician claiming ancient Sumerians were launching spacecraft to Pluto.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start at the very beginning, long before the spaceships and the genetic engineering.
Right, the historical baseline.
Exactly. Who are the Anunnaki, actually? If I were, like, a farmer living in the city of Eridu in 2100 BCE,
Yeah.
who did I think these beings were?
Wow.
And try to avoid the heavy academic jargon, because I know Mesopotamian history can get incredibly dense really fast.
That's a fair request. I'll do my best. So, to establish that baseline, we have to look at the terminology and the earliest texts, specifically from what we call the post-Akkadian period and the Third Dynasty of Ur.
Wait, pause right there.
Sure.
Before we even get to the gods, what do those periods mean for someone who isn't a historian? Like, put me in that time and place.
Certainly. So the Third Dynasty of Ur, which we often just call Ur, happened around the 21st century BCE.
Okay.
Picture a highly centralized bureaucratic empire covering much of modern-day Iraq. This wasn't a loose collection of tribes.
Right.
This was a society absolutely obsessed with administration, accounting, and organization.
Like an ancient IRS.
Basically, yes.
Yeah.
They recorded everything.
Right.
Every grain of barley, every head of cattle, every single day of labor. The state was incredibly powerful and structured.
Okay, so an empire of accountants and bureaucrats.
Exactly. And a society's vision of heaven almost always reflects its earthly realities.
Oh, that makes sense.
Right. So the term Anuna, which is the earlier Sumerian form, later becoming Anunnaki or Anunnaku in the Akkadian language, it translates roughly to princely offspring or royal progeny.
Royal progeny, okay.
Etymologically, it refers to the descendants of An, the supreme sky god, and Ki, the earth goddess,
Got it.
who, by the way, is often identified with the mother goddess Ninhursag.
So, right out of the gate, the name itself just means the children of the sky and the earth.
Yes.
It's just a genealogical term. It doesn't mean those who came from heaven to earth, which is a translation I know we're going to run into later when we get to the 20th century stuff.
There's absolutely no etymological basis for the came from heaven to earth translation.
Yeah.
None. They were simply the highest-ranking deities in the pantheon. Think of them somewhat like the Olympians in Greek mythology, or just a divine royal family.
Okay, so what do they actually do?
Their primary mythological function, as outlined in texts like the Sumerian poem Enki and the World Order, was to decree the fates of humanity.
Decreeing fates. That sounds very in line with that bureaucratic society you just described.
It was incredibly bureaucratic.
Right.
Ancient Mesopotamians envisioned the heavens as a literal reflection of their own city-states.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the Annuna operated almost like a semi-democratic legislative assembly.
Wow.
They would gather in a divine council, debate the issues of the day, and make binding decisions that governed the cosmos and the earthly realm.
So it heavily reflects the real-world politics of that third dynasty of Ur.
Exactly. The gods were essentially the ultimate cosmic city council.
Hold on, if they were the supreme gods, like the ultimate cosmic city council making all the big decisions, why wasn't there a giant golden temple dedicated to the Anunnaki right in the center of the empire?
That's a great question.
Like, if I'm an ancient king, shouldn't I be building my biggest ziggurat to the whole group to keep them happy?
What's fascinating here is that there is almost no historical evidence of a central Anunnaki cult.
Really? None?
Almost none. You didn't really go to a temple to worship the Annuna as a collective group. And the reason for that lies in the hyper-local nature of ancient Mesopotamian religion.
Explain that. What do you mean by hyper-local?
Every major deity was the patron, the literal landlord of a specific city.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. You worshipped Enki if you lived in the city of Eridu. You worshipped Nana, the moon god, in Ur. You worshipped Marduk in Babylon.
So it was very compartmentalized.
Completely. The city temple wasn't just a place to pray. It was the literal physical house of that specific god. And their cult statues were not just representations or symbols.
Wait, they weren't just symbols like a statue of a saint in a modern church?
No, the theology was much more literal than that. Through a complex ritual called the opening of the mouth, the statue was believed to be animated by the divine presence. The statue was the god.
So how does that work practically? If the statue is alive, do you have to, treat it like a living person?
That's exactly what it meant. It required immense daily maintenance.
You're kidding.
I'm serious. High priests had to physically wake the god up in the morning. They had to wash the statue, clothe it in elaborate, astronomically expensive garments covered in gold and lapis lazuli.
Oh my God.
And they had to bring it massive daily feasts so the god could eat. They even had special boats and chariots so the statues could travel to other cities to visit other gods for festivals.
That is wild. The logistics of that alone must have driven the entire economy of the city.
It did. The temple was the economic engine of the state. So, returning to the Annuna, they were the collective of these individual city patrons.
Right.
You might invoke the 50 Annuna of Eridu in a prayer, but your primary day-to-day relationship was with your local patron deity who physically lived down the street in the big temple.
Okay, that makes total sense.
They were a cohesive group in the mythology and the literature, but in daily religious practice, you dealt with the individual gods.
It's like how you might respect the concept of the federal government, but if you have a pothole on your street or a tax issue, you go to your local mayor.
That is a very apt analogy.
You interact with the individual representative who actually manages your district.
Yes. The federal government is an abstract collective. The mayor is the one whose house you can actually walk up to.
Right.
And what's really interesting is that we see the role of this federal government of gods shift significantly over time.
How so?
Originally, in the earliest Sumerian texts, the Annuna are predominantly heavenly deities, the great gods of the sky.
Okay.
But as we move into the Middle Babylonian period, around the 15th to 12th centuries BCE, a massive theological shift occurs.
What happens? Do they lose a war or something?
Not a war exactly, but a restructuring of the pantheon. The term Anunnaki becomes specifically associated with the underworld.
Oh, wow.
They become chthonic deities.
Chthonic. I've heard that word thrown around a lot in mythology podcasts. Define it for our listener, just to be clear.
Absolutely. Chthonic comes from the Greek word for earth or soil. In mythology, it refers to deities or spirits of the underworld, the subterranean realm, as opposed to the celestial deities of the sky.
Got it.
So the Anunnaki go from being the sky council to being lords of the underworld,
They get demoted to the basement?
or perhaps reassigned to the most permanent jurisdiction of all death.
Oh, that's a good point.
A new group of gods called the Igigi begins to represent the heavenly deities, while the Anunnaki take over the netherworld. We see this beautifully and terrifyingly illustrated in the myth of Inanna's descent into the netherworld.
Oh, I read a bit about this one. Inanna is the queen of heaven, a huge deal in the pantheon, goddess of love and war.
Yes, she is.
And she decides she just wants to take over the underworld, which is ruled by her sister Ereshkigal.
Correct. Inanna is ambitious to a fault. But when she descends into the underworld, she is stripped of her powers and her garments at each of the 7 gates.
Right.
When she finally arrives in the throne room, she has to stand trial before the Annuna.
And in this story, the Annuna aren't just bureaucrats. They are described as 7 merciless judges.
Very merciless.
They don't decree the fate of nations anymore. They decree the fate of the dead. They look at Inanna, who, again, is a major, incredibly powerful goddess. They deem her guilty of extreme hubris, and they essentially condemn her to death with a single look.
It's brutal.
They turn her into a piece of rotting meat and hang her on a hook. It's a terrifying image of their absolute authority.
It's a striking visual. And it shows that whether they are in heaven decreeing the fate of cities or in the underworld judging the dead, their core function remains the same.
Which is?
Absolute binding authority. They are the law.
So if the Anunnaki are the ultimate terrifying law, the ultimate federal judges of the cosmos, how did regular people fit into this?
That's the big question.
Right, because to really understand how these gods functioned, and more importantly, how humans viewed their relationship to these gods, we have to look at how they supposedly created humanity in the first place.
Yes, and that takes us to the Atrahasis epic. The earliest known version, the Old Babylonian or classical version, dates back to the 17th century BCE.
Which is incredibly old.
It is. Long before the book of Genesis was compiled, long before the Greek myths of Prometheus, this text details the origins of the world, the flood, and the creation of humanity.
Let's set the scene for Atrahasis for you listening, because the universe it describes isn't like a magical garden where things just pop into existence.
Far from it.
It's basically a massive cosmic construction site. The senior gods, the Anunnaki, are the upper management, and the lesser gods, the Igigi, are the blue-collar workers.
Yes.
And the work sounds utterly brutal.
It is the ultimate expression of corvée labor.
Okay, let's pause on that term. Corvée labor.
I know it's a historical economic system, but how did it actually function in a Sumerian person's daily life? Well, in ancient Mesopotamia, there was no coined money.
Really? None.
Right. You couldn't just pay your taxes with silver very easily if you were a regular farmer, so you paid your taxes to the king with your sweat.
Oh, wow.
For a certain number of weeks or months every year, the state would draft you. Or you leave your farm and go dig canals, build city walls, or harvest the king's fields.
That sounds exhausting.
It was grueling, mandatory physical labor required to keep the civilization functioning.
And without those canals, the rivers flood the wrong areas, the crops fail, and everyone starves. So the work is literally mandatory for survival.
Precisely. And in Atrahasis, the gods are doing this exact same work.
Okay.
The text describes the Igigi digging the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, building the mountains, and maintaining the cosmic canals.
That is some heavy lifting.
It is backbreaking physical toil that goes on for 40 periods of time, which could mean 40 years or 40 millennia, until they simply cannot take it anymore.
I love visualizing this part of the text. It reads exactly like a modern-day labor strike.
It really does.
The Igigi literally throw down their shovels. They set their tools on fire. They form a mob, and they march under the cover of night to the great temple of Enlil.
The chief god.
Right, the CEO of the cosmos. They surround his house, demanding an end to their grueling labor.
It's a profound moment in ancient literature.
Mm-hmm.
The gods themselves are suffering from the human condition of exhaustion and burnout.
Right.
Enlil is terrified. He wakes up, sees the mob surrounding his estate, and his first instinct is authoritarian. He wants to call down his weapons and destroy them.
Of course he does.
But Enki, the god of water and wisdom, steps in. He acts as the mediator, the cosmic labor negotiator.
Enki always seems to be the one finding the clever loopholes in these myths.
Always.
He steps between the angry mob and the terrified CEO and says basically, look, the workers have a point. The work is too hard. We can't punish them for being exhausted.
Right.
But the canals still need to be dug. The universe still needs maintenance. So I have a solution. Let's create a new worker class. Let's create humanity to carry the yoke.
And the mechanism of this creation is what makes Atrahasis so vital to our understanding.
Tell us about it.
Enki declares that to create this new being, they must take clay from the earth. But the clay alone isn't enough to animate a being capable of doing the god's work.
It needs a spark.
Exactly. It must be mixed with the flesh and the blood of a slain god.
Right, so they need a divine component to make the clay work.
Yeah.
So they single out a god named We'ila. They slaughter him, mix his blood with the clay, and the mother goddess Nintu molds the first humans.
That's the story.
Now, on the surface, if I'm just reading that, it sounds incredibly violent and dark. Human beings are born from a bloody cosmic murder.
It does sound that way to modern ears.
But our sources, specifically the research by scholar Juan Pinto, point out a massive nuance here that changes everything about how we should interpret this.
Yes, Pinto's analysis is crucial here. Usually when we analyze ancient myths involving the sacrifice of a god or a person, academics often lean on René Girard's theories of sacrifice.
Okay, stop right there. Girardian theory. You hear this dropped in literary criticism all the time.
You do.
Can you give me the sort of explain it like I'm 5-foot version of what René Girard actually proposed?
Certainly. René Girard was a historian and philosopher who proposed that human societies are naturally prone to escalating cycles of violence and jealousy, what he called mimetic desire.
Mimetic desire.
Basically, we all want what our neighbor has. To stop the society from tearing itself apart, the community unconsciously channels all that aggressive tension onto a single scapegoat.
I see.
They blame this scapegoat for the community's problems, murder or exile him in a violent ritual, and the release of that tension brings temporary peace.
So it's like a pressure valve for societal violence.
Right.
A unified mob murdering one guy to make themselves feel better.
Exactly. And the violence is inherently aggressive and punitive. But Pinto argues persuasively that the sacrifice of We'ila in Atrahasis does not fit this Girardian scapegoat model.
Why not?
Because it is an example of non-aggressive violence.
Let's break that down, because it's so counterintuitive. How is butchering a god to make humans non-aggressive?
It's a fair question.
Why wasn't We'ila being punished as a scapegoat? He was the leader of the strike, right?
Yes.
He was the guy who told the Ijiji to burn their shovels.
He was the leader, yes. But remember the context. Enki already declared before the Divine Council that the strike was justified.
Oh, right.
The junior gods were right to rebel because the labor was fundamentally unjust. Therefore, We'ila isn't a criminal being executed. The text explicitly notes that We'ila possessed a specific quality called Timu.
Timu, what does that translate to?
It translates roughly to intelligence, reason, or the ability to plan and foresee.
Okay.
He's chosen not because the senior gods are angry with him, but because he has the exact cognitive trait, the intelligence that allowed him to organize a complex labor strike in the first place, that humanity will need.
Wow.
If humans are going to take over the complex infrastructural work of the gods, they can't just be mindless clay golems. They need Timu.
Oh, wow. So they aren't executing a traitor. They are selecting a donor based on merit.
Furthermore, before the sacrifice occurs, the text says We'ila is informed of his sign or his token.
Meaning what?
He's told beforehand of the immense honor and cosmic purpose of his death. He isn't dragged kicking and screaming.
That changes the tone completely.
It does. The text doesn't describe an execution. It describes a ritual bath, a purification, and a communal action where all the gods spit on the clay together. It's a sacred cooperative enterprise. He is a willing participant in a positive act of creation.
He's a volunteer, or at least he recognizes that his sacrifice solves the ultimate cosmic stalemate. It's a communal, unifying act.
Precisely.
And this stands in such stark contrast to how this story gets rewritten later. Let's talk about the Enuma Elish, because that's the Babylonian creation myth that most people might be familiar with, written hundreds of years later, around 1200 BCE.
Right. By 1200 BCE, the geopolitical landscape had changed. Babylon was the supreme power, and they needed a myth to justify why their patron god, Marduk, was the king of all gods.
So they just rewrite it.
So they rewrite the creation story. In the Enuma Elish, there is no labor dispute. There is a massive, violent cosmic war.
Okay.
The primordial sea goddess Tiamat creates an army of monsters to destroy the younger gods. Marduk defeats her in epic combat.
It's basically an ancient blockbuster action movie.
It is. And in this version, the god who is sacrificed to make humanity isn't the intelligent, noble Wi'ila. It's a god named Kingu.
And who is Kingu in this new narrative?
Kingu was Tiamat's general. He was the leader of the enemy army, the architect of the cosmic treason.
Oh, I see where this is going.
And the Enuma Elish is brutally explicit about how he is treated. Kingu is bound, he is brought before the council, they hold him legally guilty, they impose a punishment upon him, and they sever his blood vessels.
That is dark.
Humanity is created strictly from his blood as an act of aggressive Gerardian violence. We are born from a punished war criminal.
It's pure political propaganda for the city of Babylon.
Absolutely.
It justifies Marduk's supreme authoritarian rule by saying to the populace, look, Marduk saved us from the traitors, and humanity is made from the traitors' blood, so you are inherently flawed, and you better serve Marduk or else.
Exactly. The philosophical beauty of Atrahasis is completely lost.
That's a shame.
If we go back to that older Atrahasis view, I want you, the listener, to really consider how those ancient Sumerian people viewed their own existence.
Yeah.
They didn't see themselves as fallen sinners expelled from a garden, and they didn't see themselves as the inherently rebellious spawn of a cosmic war criminal.
They viewed themselves as vital co-workers with the divine.
Yes.
They carried the literal blood and the Timu, the intelligence of a leader god within them. Their daily labor going out into the hot sun, digging those irrigation canals, harvesting the wheat. It wasn't a curse or a punishment.
No, it was a sacred duty.
Right. A duty that literally kept the gods from suffering and kept the forces of chaos at bay.
It is a deeply noble, dignified view of the human condition. You are the solution to a cosmic problem built with the intelligence of a god.
I love that so much. It's profound.
It really is.
But keeping our listeners' journey in mind, if the Sumerians saw themselves as these noble, divine co-workers, how do we get to a modern Iraqi transport minister claiming they were built by aliens?
That is the million-dollar question.
Like, who broke this beautiful mythology? How did the majestic Anunnaki become gold-obsessed extraterrestrials?
For that massive shift, we have to fast forward a few millennia.
Okay, let's do it.
We leave the dusty scribal schools of ancient Babylon, skip past the fall of empires, and arrive in the year 1976 with the publication of a book called The 12th Planet by an author named Zecharia Sitchin.
Zecharia Sitchin, a name that induces absolute headaches for Assyriologists.
Oh, you have no idea.
But he is revered by millions of alternative history enthusiasts around the world.
Yes, he is.
Sitchin was a self-taught author who claimed he could read Sumerian cuneiform, a claim we will definitely dissect later. And he introduced a theory that fundamentally changed the entire landscape of modern fringe beliefs.
To properly contextualize Sitchin's impact, we have to look at what was happening in the 1970s.
Right. What was the vibe?
There were already ancient astronaut theories floating around in the cultural ether. Eric von Daniken had published Chariots of the Gods in 1968, which famously suggested that aliens visited ancient Earth and helped build human civilization.
But von Daniken's work was incredibly vague, wasn't it?
Very vague.
He basically point a camera at the pyramids of Giza or the Nazca Lines in Peru and just say, isn't this weird? Humans couldn't have done this. Must be aliens. He was all open-ended questions and no specific answers.
Precisely. Von Daniken relied on a sort of wide-eyed incredulity. But Sitchin was different.
How so?
Sitchin didn't just ask questions. He provided a massively detailed, intricately interconnected pseudo-historical narrative. Sitchin didn't just say aliens did it. He named the aliens.
Oh, wow.
He told you what specific planet they came from. He detailed their political affiliations, their family trees, and their exact technological motivations.
He built a universe. Walk us through the core Sitchin narrative. Where did the Anunnaki come from in his version of reality?
Sitchin posited that our solar system has an undiscovered rogue planet called Nibiru.
Nibiru, right. I've seen that on YouTube.
According to his calculations, Nibiru has a highly elliptical orbit that takes it deep into deep space, returning to our inner solar system only once every 3,600 years.
Okay.
And according to Sitchin, this planet is home to an advanced, human-looking, technologically superior extraterrestrial species, the Anunnaki.
And their planet is dying, right?
Yes, he gave them a compelling ecological crisis. Sitchin claimed that Nibiru was losing its atmospheric density, much like concerns about Earth's ozone layer in the late 20th century.
How convenient.
Right, so what do? They need a way to geoengineer their atmosphere to save their world. Their scientific solution is to mine monatomic gold, process it into a fine dust, and suspend those gold particles in their atmosphere to reflect light and trap heat.
It's amazing how he grounds it in real 20th century anxieties.
Mm-hmm.
Atmospheric degradation, geoengineering, resource extraction.
Exactly.
So they need gold. And around 450,000 years ago, they jump in their rocket ships, and they come to Earth because our planet happens to be rich in gold veins.
According to Sitchin, yes. He claims they splashed down in the Persian Gulf, established their first Earth base in the ancient city of Eridu in southern Mesopotamia, and then set up massive industrial mining operations in southern Africa.
And here is where Sitchin pulls the ultimate intellectual heist on the Atrahasis epic we just talked about.
He really does.
He takes that beautiful philosophical story of the Igigi labor strike and strips all the mythic poetry out of it, replacing it with a sci-fi corporate dispute.
Right.
In Sitchin's telling, the lower-class Anunnaki astronauts, the Igigi, are sent down into the African gold mines. They toil for hundreds of thousands of years. It's hot, the work is brutal, and finally they mutiny against the Anunnaki management.
It maps almost perfectly onto the structure of the ancient text, which is what made it so convincing to lay readers.
Yeah, if you don't know the context, it sounds plausible.
Exactly. And just as in the original myth, Enki steps in with a solution to the labor strike. But instead of a sacred ritual where clay is mixed with the blood of a willing, intelligent god to create a co-worker, Sitchin claims that Enki was acting as a high-ranking alien geneticist.
He brings out the test tubes.
Essentially, yes. Sitchin claims Enki utilized in vitro fertilization and advanced genetic engineering.
Wow.
He took the DNA of the Anunnaki and hybridized it with the DNA of Homo erectus, an early hominid that was naturally evolving on Earth, to create a genetically engineered slave race designed purely to hold a pickaxe and mine gold.
And that slave race is us.
What slave race, according to Sitchin, is us, Homo sapiens.
It is breathtaking how neatly he retrofits the sci-fi tropes onto the ancient texts.
It is clever, I'll give him that.
He turns Enki into a rogue, brilliant geneticist. He turns Enlil, the chief god of the pantheon, into the ruthless corporate station manager who hates the new human hybrids because they're noisy and multiply too fast.
Right.
And Sitchin even claims that the biblical flood was actually caused by Enlil trying to wipe out the human experiment, utilizing the gravitational pull of Nibiru passing by to melt the Antarctic ice cap.
If we connect this to the sociology of belief, Sitchin's appeal becomes incredibly clear.
Absolutely.
He provided a cohesive historical narrative that felt grounded. He had named characters with clear psychological motivations. Enki, the pro-human scientist, versus Enlil, the anti-human commander.
It's like a soap opera.
Exactly. He gave specific dates spanning hundreds of thousands of years. He gave technological explanations that sounded plausible to a post-Apollo program audience.
I often compare Sitchin's methodology to someone writing a brilliant, deeply immersive historical sci-fi novel like Frank Herbert's Dune or an episode of The Expanse, but then binding it in a leather cover, stamping a university seal on it, and aggressively marketing it to the public as a peer-reviewed PhD dissertation.
That is exactly the aesthetic he cultivated, and it's a known psychological tactic in alternative history called scientism.
Scientism, I like that word.
He didn't just tell a story. He used the appearance of rigorous science to legitimize it. He filled his books with dense chronological calculations, mapping out geological eras, cross-referencing obscure astronomical data, and providing hundreds of dense academic-looking footnotes.
So it looks legit.
To the average reader without a background in Assyriology, it looks identical to a genuine academic textbook.
It's the aesthetics of authority. He drowns you in numbers and math so you stop questioning the premise.
Precisely.
He'll say something like, well, the Sumerian king list uses a unit of measurement called a shar, which is exactly 3,600 years. And if you multiply that by the orbital mechanics of Nibiru passing the asteroid belt...
And people just accept it.
Yeah, your eyes glaze over, you feel intimidated by the math, and you just assume, wow, this guy's a genius. I don't understand the math, but he clearly does.
And yet, as the sources clearly indicate, his writings have been universally and categorically rejected by mainstream historians, linguists, and Assyriologists. Scholars like Ryan Winters, who analyzed Sitchin specifically from an Assyriological perspective, and Michael Heiser, a scholar of Biblical Hebrew and ancient Semitic languages, have pointed out that Sitchin's entire foundation is a house of cards.
Total fabrication.
It's based on deliberately misrepresenting texts, truncating quotes to remove context, and fundamentally mistranslating Sumerian words.
Right, because his biggest weapon wasn't his math. His ultimate trump card was his claim that he alone possessed the linguistic key to unlock a secret code in the Sumerian language.
Yes, that was his main defense.
He claimed that all the stuffy establishment academics were either too blind to see the truth or actively conspiring to hide it. So I want to step into the shoes of those academics for a minute.
Okay, let's do it.
Let's look at the actual linguistic illusion he created. How did he actually twist the cuneiform to make it say what he wanted?
Well, to understand the linguistic gymnastics Sitchin performed, you first have to understand the true, staggering complexity of cuneiform.
It's not just an alphabet, is it?
No, cuneiform is not an alphabet like English, where a letter makes a single sound. It is a logosyllabic script that evolved organically over 3,000 years.
3,000 years. The English language is barely recognizable to us if we go back 600 years to Chaucer. So how did cuneiform evolve?
Exactly. Originally, in early Sumerian around 3200 BCE, it was highly logographic and pictographic, meaning a single sign represented an entire word or concept, and originally those signs were pictures that actually looked like the thing they described.
So drawing a picture of a literal star to mean the word star.
Correct. But over centuries, scribes started writing faster. Drawing curves in wet clay is hard, so they started making straight, wedge-shaped impressions with a stylus.
Right, because it's cuneiform, which means wedge-shaped.
Exactly. The pictures became highly abstracted into patterns of wedges that eventually looked absolutely nothing like the original pictures. Furthermore, the Sumerian language is what we call a language isolate.
Meaning what?
It is related to no other known human language.
Wow, okay.
But then, the Akkadians conquer the region. The Akkadians speak a Semitic language, related to modern Arabic and Hebrew. Their grammar and vocabulary are completely different from Sumerian. But they adopt the Sumerian cuneiform script to write their own language.
That sounds like an administrative nightmare. How do you use a picture-based script meant for one language to write a totally unrelated language?
By using the signs syllabically. So a sign that used to mean a whole word in Sumerian, let's say the word for water, which was pronounced A, might just be used by the Akkadians to represent the phonetic sound ah in the middle of a completely unrelated Akkadian word.
Oh, that's incredibly confusing.
It is incredibly complex. A single cuneiform sign can have multiple logographic meanings and multiple syllabic readings depending on the context of the sentence, the time period it was written, and the language the scribe was using.
You know, the prompt earlier suggested an emoji analogy, and I think we need to expand that because it's brilliant.
Let's hear it.
Imagine if the bat emoji, the little picture of the flying animal, meant a literal bat. That's the pictographic stage. But then, a few hundred years later, people start using the bat emoji to mean the concept of nighttime. That's the ideographic stage.
Makes sense.
Then, 500 years later, a completely different culture adopts emojis to write their language. They just use the bat emoji to represent the phonetic sound bat, like the first syllable in the word battery.
That is a perfect modern equivalent of the scribal process.
So you have a document from the year 3000 AD that uses the bat emoji in the word battery, and then Sitchin comes along, ignores 3,000 years of linguistic evolution, looks at the word battery, points to the little picture of the bat, and says, look, Bruce Wayne was here. It's a literal flying bat.
Exactly.
He treats cuneiform as a literal rebus puzzle, ignoring all phonetic and historical context.
There's precisely what he does. He forces an archaic, iconographic reading onto texts that were written syllabically thousands of years after the signs stopped being pictures. Let's look at a concrete example from his work. The controversy over the sign MU.
Ah, the MU controversy. This is arguably the cornerstone of his entire technological argument.
It really is.
In mainstream academia, when a translator sees the cuneiform sign MU, what does it mean?
Well, depending on the grammatical context, it almost always translates to year or name or renown.
Very standard, somewhat abstract historical concepts. What does Sitchin say it means?
Sitchin translates MU as rocket ship or skyborne vehicle.
Okay, hold on. How on earth does he leap from the concept of a name to a rocket ship? What is the mechanism of that translation?
He uses the exact flawed methodology we just discussed. He ignores the context of the sentence and instead points to the very oldest, archaic pictographic forms of the sign, from the dawn of writing.
The bat emoji.
The bat emoji. He looks at those early scratches and says, look at the shape. We clearly see a conical chamber with a narrow cylindrical section attached to it. He claims it visually looks exactly like an Apollo-era rocket capsule.
That is unbelievable. And from that purely visual, subjective leap, he goes back and rewrites major foundational mythological texts.
He does.
For example, the Tower of Babel story in the Bible, or the Epic of Gilgamesh. In both those stories, you have men or heroes striving to make a name for themselves, to build a legacy.
Yes.
Sitchin looks at those translations and says, no, no, no. They weren't trying to make a name MU for themselves. They were trying to build a launch tower to fly in a rocket ship. MU.
It fundamentally rewrites the psychological motivation of the ancient world. Instead of a universal, deeply human desire for legacy, fame, and conquering the fear of death by making a name for himself, it becomes a literal technological space race to escape the planet's gravity well.
It completely flattens the poetry of the human experience into a hardware manual.
That's a great way to put it.
And he does the exact same thing with the most important word in the Sumerian religion, the word dinger.
Yes, Dingir is the Sumerian word meaning deity, god, heaven, or the abstract notion of divinity itself.
It's the core religious term.
Academically, in its later forms, it is written with a single star-shaped cuneiform sign. It's often placed before a name as a silent determinant, just to tell the reader the name coming next is a god.
But Sitchin breaks it apart to make it fit his spaceship theory, doesn't he?
He does. He presents it to his readers not as a single unified concept, but as a two-syllable hyphenated construction. Din, dier.
Oh boy.
He then goes into the Sumerian dictionary and claims that the syllable dien means righteous, pure, or bright, and the syllable gir means a sharp, pointed object.
Wait, I see where this is going.
Yeah. He then selectively cherry-picks specific rare variations of early cuneiform signs, places them side by side in his book, and claims they visually represent a two-stage rocket with tail fins.
So therefore?
Therefore, Dingir, the ancient word for gods, doesn't mean gods at all. It means the pure ones of the blazing rockets.
The psychological trick he is playing on the reader here is masterful.
It is very effective.
By taking complex, abstract, poetic language and boiling it down to a literal picture puzzle, Sitchin flatters his audience. He makes you, the layman reading a paperback in 1980, feel incredibly empowered.
Right, because you can see it too.
Exactly. He's telling you that you don't need a PhD in Assyriology to see the truth. You just need to look at this picture of a rocket. He makes the reader feel like they are part of an exclusive, enlightened club that has seen through the lies of mainstream academia. It's a total democratization of secret knowledge.
And he applies this exact same rebus puzzle logic to ancient iconography and art. He relies heavily on ancient cylinder seals.
What are those exactly?
These are small carved stone cylinders that merchants and officials use to roll intricate, raised impressions onto wet clay documents. They are filled with highly complex mythological, religious, and astrological scenes.
Okay, so they're like ancient signature stamps.
Basically. Sitchin will look at one of these seals, point to a vaguely elongated or conical shape floating in the sky above a chariot in a highly stylized scene, and boldly declare that is clearly a rocket ship propelled by flames.
Which relies entirely on what scholars call antiquity bias, combined with a massive psychological projection of modern aesthetics.
Precisely. You have to consider the audience. The modern reader in the late 1970s looks at that seal, and having spent the last decade watching the Apollo missions and the Saturn V rockets on television, projects their modern aerospace aesthetics backward in time.
They see what they want to see.
They see a rocket on the ancient stone because they are culturally primed to see a rocket. They lack the visual vocabulary of the ancient Near East, where that shape might represent a divine symbol, a stylized star, a sacred vessel, or a ritual object.
Right. So if we look at Sitchin objectively, his linguistics are entirely fabricated, his translations ignore thousands of years of grammar, and his visual evidence relies on people projecting 1970s sci-fi onto ancient art.
Pretty much.
Which leads me to the most important question of this entire deep dive.
How's that?
If his theories are universally rejected by every credible historian, linguist, and archaeologist as total pseudo-archaeology, why didn't his books just fade away into the bargain bin of history? Why did his ideas explode into dozens of different, wildly popular, modern spiritual and conspiratorial movements?
Because Sitchin, intentionally or not, provided the perfect foundational text for what the sociologist Colin Campbell termed the cultic milieu.
Okay, let's really dig into the sociology here. What exactly is the cultic milieu? It sounds like a gathering of cult leaders, but it's much broader than that, right?
Much broader. The cultic milieu is a sociological concept describing a broad countercultural space where rejected knowledge flourishes.
Rejected knowledge?
It's the cultural ecosystem of alternative history, conspiracy theories, fringe science, New Age spirituality, and occultism. It's a space united not by a single belief, but by a shared epistemology of distrust.
A shared epistemology of distrust. That's a great phrase.
They share a profound suspicion of orthodox, mainstream institutions, whether that's government, academia, or mainstream religion.
So in this space, ideas don't have to be scientifically rigorous or peer-reviewed. They just have to be psychologically satisfying.
Yes.
They have to offer an alternative narrative that explains why the world feels wrong, and they have to offer the believer a sense of secret, elevated knowledge. And Sitchin's Anunnaki were the ultimate open-source mythology for this space.
They really were.
Because he stripped away all the original Sumerian religious context, the Anunnaki became a blank slate. They fractured and adapted into wildly different belief systems depending on what the specific group needed them to be.
The adaptability of the narrative is the key to its survival. Sitchin's universe was expansive enough and vague enough on certain theological points that different groups could latch on to different elements of it to serve their own psychological or political agendas.
Let's look at the conspiratorial branch first. And I want to remind you, our listener, as we go into this, we are impartially reporting on the findings of our sociological source material regarding modern conspiracy theories. We are simply analyzing how Sitchin's work was mutated by others.
Important distinction.
The most famous example of this mutation is the work of David Icke.
Yes, the British author and conspiracy theorist who popularized the global reptilian conspiracy theory in the late 1990s. Icke took Sitchin's Anunnaki and fundamentally darkened their motivations.
Sitchin's Anunnaki, while exploitative, were basically just human-looking astronauts doing a corporate job to save their planet. They were a bit selfish, but ultimately civilized. How does Icke change them?
Icke claims that the Anunnaki are not humanoids, but actually shape-shifting interdimensional reptilian entities.
Anunnaki.
He asserts that they didn't just mine gold and leave. He claims they never left Earth.
Yeah.
Instead, they've retreated into the shadows and are actively running a global conspiracy, which he calls the Babylonian Brotherhood, manipulating world governments, finance, and media.
And as the academic sources highlight, Icke blends this extraterrestrial theory with deeply troubling, historically fraught concept.
He does.
Our sources note he posits the existence of an Aryan master race that is supposedly descended by direct, pure bloodline from these Anunnaki overlords. He incorporates wild syncretism, grabbing elements from every corner of the cultic milieu.
It's quite the mix.
He links the Anunnaki to dragons, to European Dracula folklore, and to draconian laws linking them, often based solely on superficial phonetic similarities in the words, much like Sitchin's rebus puzzles.
It's a complete cocktail of paranoia and rejected knowledge. It takes the ancient Mesopotamian gods, strips them of their historical context, and turns them into the ultimate sinister other pulling the strings of global suffering.
Right, but that is just the dark, politically charged, conspiratorial side. The Anunnaki also got adopted by the apocalyptic and spiritual branches of the milieu.
Yes, it goes in many directions.
Yeah, right. Let's talk about the doomsday side. The sources mention a figure named Nancy Lieder, who founded the Zeta Talk movement on the early internet. How did she use Sitchin?
Lieder took Sitchin's astronomical concept of the planet Nibiru and turned it into an imminent apocalyptic threat.
Of course she did.
Sitchin originally suggested Nibiru's orbit was stable and its eventual return would be a relatively peaceful, perhaps enlightening event far in the future. Lieder adapted his math, claiming Nibiru was actually an impending planet X that was going to pass dangerously close to Earth in the early 2000s.
Then cause what?
Causing catastrophic magnetic pole shifts, massive earthquakes, and a global flood, possibly accompanied by a hostile invasion.
It's the classic doomsday cult mechanism. She used Sitchin's dense pseudoscientific astronomy as the rigid scientific veneer for an emotionally driven apocalypse. It gave people a date and a reason to panic. But then, on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, you have the New Age spiritualists. They take a much more positive, albeit equally bizarre, view of the alien narrative. For New Age believers, the Anunnaki DNA that Enki supposedly spliced into us isn't a mark of slavery at all.
No. In the New Age interpretation, that extraterrestrial DNA is viewed as the ultimate mark of divine potential. They view that genetic intervention as the civilizing aspect of humanity, the evolutionary spark that elevates us spiritually above animals and connects us to the cosmos.
Some authors in the cultic milieu have even attempted to trace Anunnaki bloodlines through history, claiming that this genetic heritage is the source of magical power, spiritual charisma, or divine right.
Really?
Yeah, they link the Anunnaki DNA to the Holy Grail, the bloodline of Jesus, or even the mythological elves of European folklore.
It's an astounding level of syncretism.
Yeah.
Sitchin writes a sci-fi book about gold miners in the 1970s,
Yeah.
and 30 years later, people are earnestly claiming that Jesus of Nazareth was a Sumerian alien genetic hybrid.
It's wild. We also see this deep need for validation in certain Black nationalist and Nubian movements, as detailed in the source literature, where Anunnaki DNA is claimed as a specific biological marker of spiritual supremacy for Black people, tracing a direct, empowering lineage back to these ancient, highly advanced extraterrestrial gods.
Sitchin's theory becomes a flexible, blank canvas for identity politics and spiritual validation across the entire cultural spectrum.
What I find truly fascinating about this entire evolution is how Sitchin himself reacted to it in his later years. He watches his sci-fi theory spiral into reptilians, doomsday cults, and new religions. And in 2001, he publishes a book called The Lost Book of Enki. And this book feels like a massive course correction.
It is a profound departure from his earlier methodology. His first book, The 12th Planet, was deliberately structured to look like an academic dissertation. Footnotes, charts, logical arguments, appeals to rationalism. The Lost Book of Enki abandons that entirely.
What does he do instead?
It is written explicitly as a narrative. It's framed as a manuscript trouvé, a found document.
Right. He frames the book as an ancient, lost text dictated directly by the god Enki to a master Sumerian scribe named Endibsar, and he writes it in this poetic, almost biblical cadence, heavily utilizing a pseudo-Sumerian sentence structure, putting the verbs at the end of the sentences to make it feel like authentic scripture.
He essentially stops pretending to be a historian translating documents and literally steps into the role of a prophet revealing scripture. But the most important addition Sitchin makes to the lore in this book is the introduction of two brand new characters that fundamentally alter the theology of his universe.
He introduces a concept he calls the father of all beginning, and a white-haired messenger named Galzu. Explain why this is such a massive deal for the Sitchin timeline.
Up until this point, Sitchin's universe was strictly coldly material.
Mm.
The gods weren't gods. They were just biological beings with advanced technology and spaceships. They were flawed, they were greedy, they needed gold. But in the Lost Book of Enki, Sitchin introduces a higher, ultimate, ineffable divine power that sits above the alien Anunnaki.
The aliens have their own god.
Exactly. The Anunnaki themselves are depicted as having a religion. They revere this father of all beginning, who acts as the unseen creator of the universe. And Galzu acts as an angelic messenger from this ultimate creator, appearing in dreams and visions to guide the Anunnaki, for instance. It is Galzu who secretly tells Enki to warn humanity about the impending flood, overriding Enlil's harsh corporate orders. Galzu introduces divine providence into the sci-fi story. By doing this, Sitchin bridges the final, crucial gap for his readers. He makes his ancient astronaut theory perfectly compatible with modern Abrahamic religions. You can read his books and believe that physical aliens engineered your DNA to mine gold, while also believing that those aliens were operating under the divine providence of the ultimate, omnipotent God of the universe. It creates a safe psychological space for the biblical God to coexist with the spaceships. It is the ultimate irony of the Korya Sitchin's legacy. He spent his entire career trying to strip the magic, the mystery, and the divine out of ancient texts. He tried his hardest to reduce the spiritual awe of the Mesopotamians down to nuts and bolts, orbital mechanics, and material technology.
But in the end, the human need for the divine is just too strong. His followers, and eventually Sitchin himself, turned the Anunnaki back into deeply spiritual, mystical beings. The cold, hard sci-fi narrative was ultimately overwritten by the human desire for ultimate meaning, for angels, for destiny, and for God. They started as gods on clay tablets, they became astronauts in paperback books, and then they became gods again on the internet.
It perfectly illustrates that mythology is not a static relic of the past that we just dig up and look at in a museum. It is a living, breathing, continuous human process. Whether it is written on a wet clay tablet in the city of Eridu 4,000 years ago or typed onto a conspiratorial message board on the modern internet, the fundamental human impulse to construct grand, overarching narratives to explain our place in the universe remains identical.
And that brings us to the end of our journey today. We have covered an incredible, sprawling arc. We started in the heat of ancient Sumer, with the noble, highly intelligent god We-Ila, who was sacrificed in a communal act of non-aggressive violence to birth humanity as a dignified partner race for the heavens. We saw that beautiful philosophy corrupted by the geopolitical propaganda of the Enuma Elish into a story of punishment and aggressive violence with Kingu. We watched Zacharias Sitchin ignore 3,000 years of linguistic evolution to transform them into genetic space miners exploiting the Earth. And finally, we saw them fracture in the cultic milieu into shape-shifting conspiracies, doomsday planets, New Age angels, and divine bloodlines.
It is a testament to the sheer enduring power of these ancient names. Even divorced from their original context, they still hold power over the human imagination.
So what does this all mean for you, our listener? I think this deep dive asks us to reflect deeply on how we consume information, especially when it comes wrapped in the aesthetics of authority. We are all naturally drawn to grand, unifying narratives. We love the idea of a secret truth that explains everything neatly, why the world is unfair, where we came from, who is really in charge behind the curtain. Sitchin's legacy is a masterclass in how easy it is to take ancient texts completely out of context, dress them up in math and footnotes, and build an entirely new fictional reality that millions of people will embrace because it satisfies a psychological need.
It is a stark warning about the fragility of historical context and the dangers of projecting our modern anxieties backward in time. And leads me to a final lingering thought for you to mull over. We look at the ancient Mesopotamians and we arrogantly assume we can perfectly decode their complex, highly localized, poetic myths as literal technological blueprints. But imagine a future civilization, perhaps 4,000 years from now. If they were to unearth the fragmented remains of our science fiction novels, our superhero movies, or the lore of our video games, entirely lacking the context of our culture, our metaphors, and our entertainment industry, what ancient gods or hidden histories might they invent about us? Will they look at a Batman comic and assume we worshipped a literal Batman who fought a clown god of chaos? Are we doing to the Sumerians exactly what we fear the future will do to us?
A terrifying, humbling, and frankly hilarious thought. Next time you look at a blueprint, or a star map, or a piece of ancient clay behind glass in a museum, remember how much of what you see is just a reflection of your own expectations and your own time. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the sources. Keep your minds open to the wonder of the past, but always keep your critical thinking sharp.